Aryan Brotherhood began in 1964 inside California's San Quentin prison. At first, it was a small white-only group formed for protection amid violent racial conflicts on prison yards. Over time, it became one of the deadliest and most feared prison gangs in the United States. Despite making up less than 1% of the prison population, the Brotherhood has been linked to as many as 1 in 4 prison murders nationwide. Their creed is simple but brutal: loyalty, silence, and violence. Betrayal often means death. Members show allegiance through tattoos of shamrocks, swastikas, and lightning bolts. And advancement often requires carrying out a stabbing or attack. The group runs itself like a military unit, with a council of leaders giving orders to soldiers. Though born behind bars, their influence quickly spread outside, working with cartels and organized crime and drug trafficking, extortion, gambling, and contract killings. The U.S. Justice Department has called them one of the most violent extremist groups in American prisons. In the 2000s, nationwide indictments sought to cripple their operations, sentencing top leaders to life. Yet, even under tight federal control, the Brotherhood maintains power through a strict code of secrecy and fear, proving that organized crime doesn't stop at prison gates. Their legacy is chilling, proof that a gang of just a few thousand can hold a system of millions hostage through violence and loyalty.
Mexican Mafia, known in Spanish as La M, which means the M, began in the late 1950s inside a California prison. It started with a small group of Latino inmates at the dual vocational institution in Tracy who banded together for protection and power in a hostile environment. What began as survival quickly turned into one of the most feared and powerful prison gangs in America. La M built its empire on extortion, drug trafficking, and taxing other Latino gangs. If a street gang member ends up in prison in California, chances are they'll be forced to follow La M's orders or face violence. They formed loose alliances on the streets under the name Sureños or Sur 13, giving the Mexican Mafia influence across thousands of neighborhood gangs. Symbolized by the letter M and the number 13, La M operates like a cartel inside prison walls. A council of senior members issues orders, while low-level soldiers and street gangs carry them out. Their reputation is so feared that even the slightest disrespect can mean instant death. The Mexican Mafia has controlled drug routes, orchestrated murders both inside and outside prison, and even infiltrated political and prison systems. Despite countless indictments and long prison sentences for leaders, La M remains one of the most dominant criminal networks in the U.S., showing how a handful of inmates created a shadow empire stretching from prison yards to city streets.
Nuestra Familia. En español se llama Our Family. They were born in the mid-1960s inside California's Soledad prison. It emerged as a direct rival to the Mexican Mafia. At its roots, Nuestra Familia tried to defend Northern California's Latino inmates, many of them farm workers and migrants, from what they saw as intimidation by La M, who largely controlled southern gangs. The rivalry hardened fast. Even today, northern Latino gangs, known as Norteños, pledged loyalty to Nuestra Familia, while Sureños answered to La M. This rivalry has fueled decades of prison riots, murders, and street wars across the state. Nuestra Familia enforces strict loyalty. Symbols include the number 14 for the letter N and red bandanas, setting them apart from Southern Blue of Los Angeles-based groups. Members climbed ranks by proving discipline and commitment, often through violent acts. By the 1980s and 90s, Nuestra Familia shifted from protection to large-scale drug trafficking, extortion, and organized hits run through a structured military-style hierarchy headquartered in prison. Leaders issued coded orders through kites and mail to armies of Norteños on the street. Today, FBI and California task forces have battered the leadership, but Nuestra Familia remains a powerful force. Born out of resistance, it evolved into an organized criminal syndicate locked in perpetual conflict with La M, a war that defines gang politics across the Golden State.
Texas Syndicate. Formed in the 1950s at Dual Vocational Institution in California, but it truly exploded in the 1970s inside Texas state prisons. Hispanic inmates from Texas, surrounded by powerful California-based gangs, created the syndicate for a simple reason: protection. What started as a defensive brotherhood turned into one of the most organized and violent groups in Texas prisons. Members, known as TS, swear a lifetime oath sealed in blood. Their symbol, TS, or the letters 201, marks allegiance to the organization. Discipline is extreme. Violations of loyalty often mean execution. The Syndicate is notorious for running heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine trafficking networks both behind bars and on the street. Over the years, their connections with Mexican cartels strengthened their access to supply routes, making them key middlemen in the drug economy. They also profit from extortion, robberies, and contract killings. At their peak, authorities estimated over 1,000 hardcore members across Texas prisons. Smaller than La M or Nuestra Familia, but far more disciplined and structured, with a council issuing orders and soldiers executing them. Their violence has left a trail of bloody prison wars with rivals like the Barrio Azteca and Tango Blast. The Texas Syndicate remains feared as a symbol of how prison gangs recruit out of necessity, then grow into powerful empires that thrive on discipline, secrecy, and cartel ties.
Barrio Azteca, often called BA, was born in the mid-1980s inside Texas prisons, originally among Mexican-American inmates. What set them apart from other gangs is how quickly they became a bridge between U.S. prisons and Mexican cartels. Centered in El Paso, Texas, and across the border in Ciudad Juárez, Barrio Azteca aligned themselves with the Juárez cartel. This gave them access to drug trafficking routes that move billions of dollars in cocaine, heroin, and meth into the United States. Inside prisons, Barrio Azteca enforces control through brutal discipline and violence. On the outside, they act as foot soldiers for cartel orders. They're infamous for assassinations, kidnappings, and contract killings. In 2010, members were convicted for the murder of a U.S. consulate employee and her family in Juárez, a stunning reminder of their reach into both sides of the border. Law enforcement has repeatedly cracked down, indicting dozens under federal racketeering charges. But even behind bars, BA remains highly structured. Leaders in prisons direct orders to soldiers on the streets, making them a hybrid of prison gang and cartel army. Barrio Azteca represents a new breed, not just a survival gang, but a binational criminal enterprise, showing how cross-border power reshaped prison politics into international organized crime.
Black Guerrilla Family began in 1966 inside California's San Quentin prison, founded by George Jackson, a member of the Black Panther Party. Unlike most prison gangs built purely on race or profit, BGF was originally political, with a mission to promote black empowerment, Marxist ideology, and resistance against systemic oppression. Members pledged loyalty to overthrow what they called the prison industrial system. Their symbols included the black dragon and crossed rifles, signifying revolution and militancy. Yet alongside ideology, BGF quickly became one of the most violent gangs in U.S. prisons. Through the 1970s, BGF organized riots, assassinations of prison staff, and targeted killings of rival inmates. One of their most infamous moments came in 1971 with the death of George Jackson during an escape attempt, sparking violent uprisings. Over time, the group blended its radical politics with organized criminal activity, drug trafficking, extortion, and murder for hire. By the 2000s, new factions like the Black Guerrilla Family of Baltimore gained attention as FBI investigations exposed their infiltration of city politics and drug markets. The BGF remains small compared to La M or Aryan Brotherhood, but their influence has been outsized, symbolizing how ideology and criminal power can intertwine in prison culture. Their legacy is one of militancy turned empire, demonstrating that even behind bars, revolutionary movements can morph into enduring gangs.
Gangster Disciples, often called as GDs, emerged in Chicago during the late 1960s, founded by Larry Hoover and David Barksdale. On the streets, they began as part of a loose alliance to protect black communities, but quickly evolved into one of the most organized and feared gangs in America. By the 1970s, Hoover consolidated power, creating strict rules and structure. Inside prison, the GDs operated like a government. A chairman at the top, Hoover, regional governors, and soldiers underneath. Their symbol is the six-pointed star representing love, life, loyalty, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. The gang became notorious for drug trafficking, extortion, and control of prison economies. Even when Hoover was given 6 life sentences in federal prison, he allegedly continued directing the gang from inside, earning the title King Hoover. At their peak in the 1990s, authorities estimated over 20,000 members nationwide, dominating sections of Chicago and spreading across U.S. prisons. While GDs once flirted with a political front called Growth and Development, their name remains tied to violence, drug cartels, and connection between street chaos and prison control. The Gangster Disciples stand as proof that one charismatic leader and tight structure can create a criminal empire spanning both sides of the prison wall.
Vice lords, they are usually taken as another Chicago powerhouse, with roots going back to 1957 when a group of teenagers banded together at the Illinois State Training School for Boys in St. Charles. From those juvenile halls, the gang spread into Chicago's West Side, becoming one of the largest and oldest gangs in the country. In prison, vice lords organized around a mix of identity, unity, and strict codes of behavior. Their symbols include the top hat, cane, and 5-point star, often referencing love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. What made them unique is how they often masked themselves as community activists. In the 1960s and 70s, vice lord factions opened businesses, youth programs, even received foundation grants. But behind the facade, they engaged in drug trafficking, violence, and organized crime. The vice lords fractured into subsets, from conservative vice lords to traveling vice lords, spreading their influence across Chicago and into state and federal prisons. Their sheer numbers gave them power on the yard, shaping alliances and conflicts with rival gangs like the GDs. Today, vice lords remain one of the most enduring criminal organizations in the U.S., balancing identity, ritual, and ruthless business. To many, they symbolize how blurred the lines can be between social activism and hard criminal enterprise, both on the streets and behind bars.
Latin Kings. Often called the largest Hispanic street and prison gang in the United States, founded in Chicago in the 1940s, they originally formed to defend Puerto Rican immigrants against racism and other gangs. But what began as cultural pride evolved into one of the most feared and structured criminal organizations in the country. Inside prisons, the Kings operate with near religious discipline. Members call themselves part of the almighty Latin King and Queen Nation. The group has a written manifesto, rituals, prayers, and rules of behavior. Violations are punished harshly, often by beatings or death. Symbols include the 5-point crown and the colors black and gold. By the 1880s and 90s, the Latin Kings expanded across the U.S. and into Latin America, with tens of thousands of members. They became notorious for drug trafficking, extortion, and violent enforcement of loyalty, both in prisons and on the streets. A nationwide crackdown in the 2000s brought hundreds of indictments, yet the Latin Kings adapted, maintaining influence inside correctional systems. What makes them stand out is not only their size, but their identity, blending gang structure with the appearance of culture, family, and even activism. That mix of code and violence has made the Latin Kings a force that continues to thrive behind prison walls and beyond.
Nazi lowriders, or NLR, emerged in California prisons during the 1970s and 80s, but rose to prominence in the 1990s as an offshoot and feeder group of the Aryan Brotherhood. Born inside correctional yards, they grew into one of the most violent white supremacist gangs in the western U.S. Membership is usually by invitation, often starting as prospects, proving loyalty through violence. NLR members use Nazi symbols, iron crosses, and lightning bolts, though their structure blends racism with pure criminal enterprise. The gang became notorious for drug distribution, extortion, robberies, and targeted assaults, often used as muscle by the Aryan Brotherhood when numbers were needed. By the late 1990s, the NLR had expanded out of prisons into California neighborhoods, running meth networks and recruiting a younger, more reckless generation. They gained a reputation for extreme brutality even within prison politics. Law enforcement identified them as a major security threat group, and federal crackdowns in the 2000s targeted dozens of leaders with racketeering and conspiracy indictments. Though smaller and less organized than groups like La M or Aryan Brotherhood, the NLR remains a symbol of how white supremacist ideology fuels prison gang violence. They stand as a reminder that extremist movements can blend seamlessly with organized crime, spreading hate by fear and profit alike.
Texas Mexican Mafia, Mexican Mafia. Formed in the early 1980s inside Texas prisons, completely separate from California's Mexican Mafia, La M. Its founders were Mexican-American inmates tired of being dominated by other groups, so they created their own brotherhood, one built on absolute loyalty and brutal enforcement. Unlike La M, which commands Sureños, Mexicanami centered on Texas prisons and communities, especially San Antonio. They set up a paramilitary-style structure with generals, captains, and soldiers. Members swore allegiance through blood oaths and marked themselves with tattoos of the circle with a black hand, eagle, or the number 13. Mexicanami quickly made its mark in drug trafficking and extortion, demanding a tax from dealers inside and outside prison. Those who refused often didn't live long. The group also forged ties with Mexican cartels, smuggling heroin, cocaine, and meth across the Texas border, and coordinating hits in both countries. By the 1990s, federal prosecutors considered them one of the most dangerous organizations in the state, indicting dozens under racketeering charges. Yet, even with leaders locked away, Mexicanami remains entrenched in Texas prisons. For many inmates, Mexicanami symbolizes the merger of prison gang politics and cross-border cartel strategy. Not just a gang, but a shadow army that thrives on discipline, taxes, and terror.
Border Brothers. They are a unique prison gang born in Arizona during the 1980s, made up largely of Mexican nationals. Many of these men were undocumented migrants who entered U.S. prisons, then were deported to Mexico, only to be arrested again and recycled back. This cycle gave the gang its name. They truly lived on both sides of the border. Inside Arizona prisons, Border Brothers carved out influence among Mexican inmates who weren't tied to La M or Nuestra Familia. They developed their own leadership council, tattoos with BB or AZ, and a reputation for unity against rivals. Their bilingual, binational identity allowed them to build direct connections with Mexican cartels, who used them to move drugs and enforce violence. Unlike larger, older gangs, the Border Brothers embraced their outsider role. They recruited among deportees and newcomers, building loyalty through identity and shared struggle. Over the years, they've been linked to drug smuggling, arms trafficking, and assassinations tied to cartel wars. Today, Arizona authorities list them as a major security threat group. Their story highlights how geography directly shapes prison politics, gang structures designed not just for yard control, but for a constant flow of people and power across the border.
Sureños, or Sur 13, aren't a single gang, but a vast coalition of Southern California Latino street gangs. Inside prison, they unite under the authority of the Mexican Mafia, La M, which enforces discipline and demands taxes from anyone operating on the streets or behind bars. Formed in the 1960s-70s, the Sureños grew as countless barrio gangs agreed to fly the same banner in prison for protection and power. Their symbols include the number 13, the letter M for La M, the color blue, and tags of SUR. With tens of thousands of members from Los Angeles to San Diego, their strength lies in numbers and structure. Inside California prisons, Sureños dominate the yards with sheer force, outnumbering rivals. Soldiers carry out orders from La M generals, attacks, drug runs, assaults on enemies. Loyalty is demanded, betrayal is punished with death. Outside, Sureños act as extensions of La M's influence, running drug networks and enforcing street taxes. Law enforcement calls them one of the largest gang affiliations in the U.S., with influence stretching into federal prisons and even into other states. The Sureños represent scale, proof that thousands of gangs can unify under one ruthless empire, creating a prison power block with national reach.
Norteños, or Northerners, are the sworn enemies of the Sureños. They represent Latino inmates from Northern California, aligned with the Nuestra Familia gang. The rivalry between Norteñas and Sureños is among the bloodiest in U.S. prison history, starting in the late 1960s when Nuestra Familia split away from La M's control. Norteños wear red colors, use the number 14 for the letter N, and pledge allegiance to Nuestra Familia generals inside prison.
Like their rivals, they strictly enforce unity, punishing those who resist. This eternal North versus South war has defined prison yards across California for decades, leading to countless murders, riots, and lockdowns. While Sureños dominate by numbers, Norteños are known for their military-style structure and discipline. Nuestra Familia leaders, even from solitary confinement, issue orders through coded letters, kites, or covert messages. On the streets, Norteño gangs like Barrio Norteño or subsets linked to the 14 carry out extortion, drug dealing, and hits. Federal crackdowns in the 2000s weakened Nuestra Familia leadership, but Norteños remain more than just a rival gang. They are a counterpower that keeps balance in California prisons. Their story is one of resilience and oath-driven loyalty, proving that even outnumbered groups can survive through discipline and fear.
Paisas. Unlike the big names like La M or Aryan Brotherhood, the Paisas aren't a structured prison gang but rather a loose group of Mexican nationals inside U.S. federal prisons. The word paisa comes from paisano, meaning countryman, and that's exactly what they are, immigrants banding together for protection. Most Paisas have cartel ties or were arrested for trafficking drugs across the border. They rarely claim gang membership, but inside prison they form powerful unofficial blocks that work together for survival. Because they don't operate like traditional gangs, they avoid some of the attention that larger groups face. Still, Paisas carry influence. In facilities near the Southwest, they may make up a huge portion of the Latino population, often aligning with cartels like the Sinaloa or Gulf Cartel. They stick to themselves, stay business-oriented, and use strength in numbers when needed. Authorities consider the Paisas less violent than structured gangs, but their cartel connections give them resources others don't. They represent a silent majority, inmates united more by nationality than tattoos or ritual, yet capable of shifting balance on a prison yard when threatened. In short, Paisas are the wild card of prison politics, less formal but still a force no gang can ignore.